Heating your bearded dragon's enclosure is one of the most confusing things about getting your first bearded dragon. But luckily, once you've figured out the heating system, it's generally pretty easy to maintain and just needs a few tweaks here and there every so often. Heating is one of the most important aspects to be able to get right, because everything else about your bearded dragon's care will rely on the heat levels being correct. It's something that they can't produce themselves, so we shiver when we need to warm up, but a reptile can't do that. They rely on the external heat sources, which is why it's so vital for us to be able to provide that proper external heat. If the heat is too hot, your bearded dragon can burn and could even pass away from dehydration. And if it's too cold, they won't be able to digest their food properly, and they'll slowly slip away into sort of a semi-hibernation state. And if you let it go on too long, they'll get ill and they'll pass away that way as well. So it's really important to get this balance right. And it's also important to make sure you're providing some sort of a temperature gradient within the enclosure. Because if they start to get too hot, like us, if we get too hot in the sun, we can move away to the shade and still be in the same general area and be okay. A bearded dragon needs to have the option to move away from the heat source into a cooler area to be able to regulate its own body. Now, if you look at advice online, everyone is going to suggest slightly different ranges of temperatures, but the average of these ranges is usually around the same. And if there's a degree difference here or there in your heating, it doesn't really matter and have that much of an effect. It's the general principle of making sure that your heat lies within a certain range in one zone and within a certain range in another that's really important to get right, so that your dragon has those different options to go to. So for the hot end, you're looking at having a basking surface temperature of between 38 and 42 degrees Celsius. And that's specifically the surface, not the air around it. So you want to be making sure that you're measuring and using a device that can measure the actual surface temperature. This is on the slight hotter end if you're getting a baby bearded dragon. So you want to be aiming more towards that 42 degrees, because a baby bearded dragon has a lot more energy requirements. They're going to be eating a higher proportion of insects in their diet so that they can grow fast. And to be able to do this, they need to do more digestion, which requires more heat. So as a general rule, a baby bearded dragon much prefers a hotter enclosure, whereas an adult can tolerate the lower end of that range, so more like the 38 to 40 degrees Celsius for the surface temperature of the adult basking site. If you've got your basking surface temperature correct, then the air temperature in the hot end will generally fluctuate between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius. This isn't as important as the basking temperature, because what's important is that they can position their torso down on that hot temperature and encourage the digestion. The air temperature in the hot end is just a sort of side effect of the fact that heat will be emitted in that area. It's the cool end's air temperature that is much more important than the hot end air temperature. You want to aim for the cool end to be between 22 and 25 degrees Celsius, so that the dragon has the option to cool down, but isn't going to get so cold that they get ill. So it can be measured either the surface temperature or the air temperature, because once you're far enough away from that heat source, there's not really that much difference in it for measuring the air or the surface. Just make sure that it is between that 22 and 25 degree range. One thing that people often forget about is the night cycle. So you do also need to be aware of temperatures of your enclosure during the night time. Overnight, your dragon's temperatures should drop and the air temperature should measure around 15 degrees Celsius. And there shouldn't really be a heat source emitted unless your house gets really, really cold. This drop can even go as low as 10 degrees Celsius without harming your bearded dragon, so long as your daytime temperatures are correct. Scientists actually think that having this temperature drop to mimic the natural conditions of temperature dropping at night in the wild is going to encourage things like metabolism and immunity in your bearded dragon. So it's a good thing to make sure that this is actually reducing temperature. And the reason for this is that once the drop happens, like I said, it mimics those natural conditions. And then as soon as day returns and the heat source returns, the bearded dragon's instinct will be to go and bask, which encourages all of those healthy processes. Whereas if they're always just staying at the same sort of ambient temperature, then they're not feeling that instinctual need to go to a heat source and then to go and cool down. It is really important to note that your daytime temperatures must be correct for this drop to cause no ill effects. If your daytime temperatures aren't correct, the bearded dragon can't recover properly from this drop in temperature, and they might start to head towards that slight hibernation and then even get ill and then potentially pass away. So as long as your daytime temperatures are meeting those requirements of the basking side and the cool side being correct, then a drop at nighttime is also a good thing to aim for. I hope that's helped out with you understanding a little bit more about a bearded dragon's requirements for their enclosure temperatures. If you've got any more questions that you want answered about heating a bearded dragon's enclosure, then make sure to put them in the comments below.